family finally has closure after nearly 25 years, thanks to the Pueblo County Sheriff's Office. On October 14, 2000, a woman on horseback stumbled upon a makeshift campsite roughly 1 mile north of the Walking Stick housing development in Pueblo, Colorado. There, she discovered skeletal remains lying atop a sleeping bag, along with an unused tent, a second sleeping bag, clothing, several canteens, and other personal items, but no identification. A forensic anthropologist was called in to assess the remains. Based on skeletal analysis, the investigators estimated that the individual was of mixed ancestry, possibly Black, Hispanic, or Asian. The investigators estimated that the man was 6 feet 1 inches tall and weighed 150 pounds. He passed away approximately 2 months prior to the discovery of his remains. Physical features including degenerative joint disease, spinal arthritis, fused bones in the right foot, and an infection. A sign of a noticeable limp. His teeth were nearly perfect, with no fillings. A few pieces of paper were found with the decedent. One contained typed telephone numbers for Spanish Peaks mental health centers, and another had addresses of homeless shelters in the Denver area. The following year, in 2001, the University of Colorado provided a facial reconstruction. Clay bussed to the media hoping it would aid identification, but it yielded no leads. An investigation was launched and a forensic composite was developed to depict how the man may have looked during his life. Details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Person System. During the course of the investigation, a witness told the investigators that he encountered a man camping on the open range in August 2000, who stated that he was from Albuquerque and was working his way to Denver. The man had dreadlocks in his hair that were about 4 to 6 inches long. Unfortunately, the case eventually went cold. In 2021, 2 decades later, the sheriff's detectives reopened the case and began investigating. As the investigation continued, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation and Pueblo County Sheriff's Office collaborated to submit evidence to Othrum's laboratory, where scientists developed a comprehensive DNA profile for the man. This, combined with a DNA sample of items and evidence found at the campsite, was sent to the CBI, and a new DNA sample was submitted to a genetic genealogy database in 2023. In November 2024, that sample came back and matched a sample in the dataset with a distant family member. The detectives collected DNA from the family member, and in June 2025 it came back as a positive match. It was verified by a forensic investigative genetic genealogist that the man found was Marvin Majors. Marvin lived a transient lifestyle and his family had not heard from him since 1998 or 1999. Marvin's family expressed appreciation for the sheriff's office's work over the past 2.5 decades and was thankful for bringing this case to a close. His cause of demise was never identified, however. The sheriff's office said that foul play was not suspected. More than 3 decades after a young mother in Australia's life was ended, the police have made an arrest. 24-year-old Samantha Mizzi was a single mother living in Castlemaine, Victoria, in Australia. To support her 2 children, Stephen and Tennille, she occasionally worked as a lady of the night in St. Kilda, Melbourne. On March 28, 1994, Samantha traveled to St. Kilda to earn money and left her children in a friend's care. At 8:30 p.m., she visited an amusement center at Inkerman Street and Brighton Road, ordered a milkshake, and left her belongings there temporarily. Shortly after 9:50 p.m., she was seen speaking with a man near Blanche Street on Brighton Road. The man was described as Caucasian, around 182 centimeters tall, thin build, gray hair parted to the left, wearing a fawn-colored zip-up jacket and slacks. Between 10 and 10:30 p.m., neighbors reportedly heard Samantha scream several times. Around 11 p.m., a passerby found her badly injured and unconscious among bushes behind a property at 333 Brighton Road. She had suffered a violent, indecent assault, was severely beaten with a blunt object, stripped naked, and her belongings stolen. The weapon was not recovered. She was taken to the Alfred Hospital but passed away the next morning. The case remained unsolved for over 30 years. The police issued multiple public appeals in 2021, 2023, and 2025, urging anyone with information to come forward. Crime Memorial and public forums, including Reddit, helped keep the case alive. The breakthrough in the case came thanks to advances in investigative technology, including DNA analysis and genetic genealogy. On August 14th, in Victoria Police's squad arrested a 67-year-old man, Colin George McCain, in Ararat, charging him with ending Samantha's life and 2 counts of indecent assault. He appeared in Melbourne Magistrates Court and was remanded in custody, with his next court date scheduled for December 18, 2025. Samantha's children, Stephen and Tannel, were present at the court. They expressed gratitude for the arrest, while acknowledging that they would need time to process this long-awaited development. Stephen said, "We are very grateful this person is in custody. We are going to take some time as a family to process everything. We have got a long journey ahead." Detective Inspector Dean Thomas emphasized the long arm of justice. It does not matter how many years have passed. Progress can be made, providing families with long-needed answers. Thomas said, "If there are people out there who have information about a crime such as this, no matter how many years have passed, I can assure you that it is never too late to come forward." The authorities have not shared further details about what led to the arrest, but said that the investigation into her demise remains ongoing. Remains found in 1980 remained unidentified for 45 years until forensic science finally helped identify the man. In April 1980, 20-year-old Danny Mitchell was reported missing. He was last seen at a house on Euclid Avenue in Cleveland, Ohio. He was described as 5 feet 7 inches, 150 pounds, wearing blue jeans, an orange-flowered shirt, and a black jacket, and he carried his 1978 John Adams High School class ring. For 37 years, the case went cold. That is, until 2017, when Danny's family happened to see a press conference held by the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation about an unidentified man found in Twinsburg, Ohio, in 1982. Danny's family thought it may be him, so they submitted DNA hoping for answers. Their DNA were not a match to the body, and the man found in Twinsburg was later identified as someone else. But Danny's family renewed interest in his case, leading the BCI to add his information into the National Missing and Unidentified Missing Person System. Then 3 years later, in 2020, the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's Office added John Doe, 1980 to name us. That entry prompted a possible match and raised a new question. In May 1980, the body was discovered in a Cleveland building slated for demolition. Bound with an electrical cord, the remains were unrecognizable. Though the cause of demise was undetermined, the medical examiners believed that the remains belonged to a black male between the ages of 18 to 30. They named him John Doe 1980. The investigators tried to use DNA to find an answer, but because of limited evidence, they were not able to confirm that the 2 cases were connected. Still, they did not give up. Another 2 years later, in 2022, the team reached out to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children for help. NCMEC worked with Danny's siblings to collect DNA and coordinated with the investigators to send hair samples, which was the only available evidence in this case to Astria Forensics. Astria Forensics is a lab that specializes in difficult cases. The first round of testing came back incomplete. They did not have enough DNA to confirm a match. Then, in October 2024, NCMEC received funding through the Children's Justice Project to try again. This time, the testing worked. Astria Forensics was able to build a suitable DNA profile from the Cleveland case. From there, they shared the profile with Innovative Forensic Investigations, who compared it to DNA from Danny's siblings by uploading it to GED Match Pro. Then finally, after more than 4 decades of questions, in April 2025, the results were confirmed. The man found in Cleveland in 1980 was Danny Mitchell. The mystery that had prompted the investigators for nearly 45 years was finally solved. He was last seen less than a quarter mile from the building where his remains was located. Jennifer Lester, the BCI criminal intelligence analyst who worked on Danny's case, thanked NCMEC for their support. She also said that in working with his family, they shared that he was a wonderful person. She said he loved church, he loved dancing, singing, and he loved his family. A man has finally been identified as a perpetrator in a 1984 North Carolina cold case. On November 19, 1984, at approximately 3:12 p.m., officers responded to a missing persons call for service in the 8000 block of Eagle Wind Drive in Charlotte, North Carolina. The victim, 26-year-old Sandra Elaine Sandy Cornett, was reported missing by a neighbor after she did not show up for work. Sandy was a part-time model and insurance adjuster. Several months into the investigation of her disappearance, then 36-year-old Larry Jean Bell was identified as a suspect in her case. Bell was interviewed by investigators from multiple agencies, but he was not charged. 6 months after Sandy vanished, in May 1985, Bell abducted and took the life of a 17-year-old girl in South Carolina. 2 weeks after that, in June 1985, he did the same to a nearby 9-year-old girl. While holding the 17-year-old captive and making her write a will, Bell taunted her family with several phone calls. Both bodies were found after Bell anonymously called the police to tell them precisely where they were located. He suffocated the girls with duct tape. After Bell was arrested in the young girls' demises, he told the police that when they find Sandy's body, the bones of her hands and fingers will be like she is praying. He also described in detail what her home, the scene of her disappearance, looked like when the police found it. His precise description was something only her perpetrator would know. After Sandy disappeared, her bank card was used to withdraw about $1,000. In July 1985 interviews with Bell, he gave accurate details of those transactions. The detectives established that Sandy knew Bell, a former Eastern Airlines reservations agent, through an ex-boyfriend of hers who worked with Bell. The officers never charged Bell with any crimes related to Sandy's disappearance. Bell was later convicted of the 2 cases in South Carolina and was given the end-of-life penalty. He was executed on October 4, 1996. In February 2025, CMPD's Cold Case Unit, with funding from the National Assault Kit Initiative, completed a full review of the casework and evidence gathered over the past 4 decades. The detectives consulted with the Mecklenburg County District Attorney's Office as part of this review. After completion, the detectives determined that Bell kidnapped and took Sandy's life. He would have been charged if still alive. The detectives have cleared this case as demise of offender. Sandy's family has been notified of these developments. Sandy's remains have never been located, and she remains listed as missing in multiple national databases, including name use. Anyone with information is encouraged to contact the CMPD Cold Case Unit at 704-432-1600. Tips. In the early 2000s, a chilling wave of disappearances swept through the St. Louis, Illinois area. Women, most struggling with hardship or living on society's margins, vanished without a trace. What connected these women? At first glance, nothing other than geography and timing. But beneath the surface lurked a predator. On March 11, 2002, a body was discovered along Interstate 70 near Highland, Illinois. On March 28, in 2002, road workers found skeletal remains in a remote creek bed near Columbia, Illinois, off Route 3. That same year, near Muscuda, Illinois, another woman's remains surfaced. Another Jane Doe. Another mystery. The investigators were quick to notice similarities in the 3 Jane Doe cases. All 3 women were black, all found in rural Illinois, not far from major highways, all slain in a similar time frame. The specter of a serial perpetrator loomed large. As the police scrambled for answers, a shocking name emerged. Maury Troy Travis, a 36-year-old man from Ferguson, Missouri. In May 2002, the investigators searched Travis' home and uncovered a dungeon-like basement, complete with torture devices, videotapes of assaults, and chilling evidence linking him to multiple cases. Travis, a sadistic predator, is believed to have ended the lives of at least 12 women, possibly more. He kept macabre trophies and taunted the police with anonymous letters and maps. But before law enforcement could extract the full truth, Travis hanged himself in jail in June 2002, leaving countless unanswered questions and unidentified victims. The women found in Illinois were strongly suspected to be among his victims, But without names, the investigators could not close the cases or notify families. For decades, the Jane Does remained nameless. In 2014, their cases were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Person System, but no breakthroughs came. Between 2022 and 2025, the Illinois State Police partnered with Southern Illinois University Edwardsville students and genetic genealogy experts. They extracted DNA from the decades-old remains and uploaded profiles to genealogical databases. Matches began to surface. A son's DNA confirmed Carol Jean Hemphill's identity in early 2025. By February 24, 2025, she officially had her name back. In March 2025, the Columbia Police Department announced the news to the public. Carol, a 44-year-old mother, was last seen on July 27, 2001. She told her daughter that she was heading to a nearby store and never returned. Her family searched desperately, but she seemed to have vanished into thin air. Then, in July 2025, the investigators confirmed two more names, Crystal Alicia Lay and Kelly Johnson. Decades after their end, the mystery was finally unraveling. Crystal, only 19 years old, disappeared in early 2002. Young, vulnerable, and full of promise, Crystal's disappearance left loved ones shattered. Kelly, also from the same area, was last seen sometime in 2002. Little was documented publicly about her disappearance at the time, as it blended into the growing number of missing person reports across the region. The identifications brought bittersweet closure to families who had waited more than 2 decades for answers. But they also reopened old wounds and old fears. The authorities firmly believe all 3 women were victims of Travis. But because he passed away in 2002, he will never stand trial and never confess to the full scope of his crimes. Still, identifying these women restores dignity, accountability, and a measure of justice. These cases are not just about tragedy. They highlight the power of forensic genealogy and cold case persistence. For the families of Carol, Crystal, and Kelly, the journey is far from over. At least their loved ones are no longer lost in anonymity. In 1965, the lives of 2 West Ryde Australian families were plagued by unimaginable loss. It was the height of summer in Sydney, Australia. 2 best friends, Marion Schmidt and Christine Sherrock, both 15 years old, set off for what should have been an ordinary day at the beach. Marianne was one of 6 children from a German migrant family living in West Ryde. Her father was hospitalized at the time, and her mother worked to support the family. Christine was staying with the Schmidts during the school holidays, and the 2 girls were inseparable. That morning, the girls took Marianne's younger siblings to Cronulla Beach by train. After arriving, the group decided the main beach was too crowded and moved toward Wanda Beach, a more secluded area with large sand dunes. At some point, the younger children were left playing while the girls wandered off, reportedly saying they would return soon. Witnesses later recalled seeing the 2 girls accompanied by a tall, thin teenage boy with fair hair. The trio was spotted heading into the sand dunes away from the water. This was the last confirmed sighting of Marianne and Christine alive. The younger siblings eventually left the beach and returned home without the girls, assuming that they had gone back separately. When the girls failed to come home that night, a frantic search began. The following day, a man walking through the dunes discovered a grisly scene. The bodies of Marianne and Christine were lying partially buried in the sand. Both were brutally attacked. They had suffered multiple stab wounds, their throats were slashed, and there were indications of indecent assault. Their belongings were scattered, and drag marks in the sand showed that they had been moved after their lives were ended. The investigators determined that the attack was savage and prolonged. One girl appeared to have tried to run but was dragged back. The weapon used in the attack was never found, but it is believed to have been a knife. The case shocked Australia and triggered a massive police investigation. The detectives interviewed hundreds of people who were at the beach that day. The description of the blonde teenage boy became a focal point, but no concrete leads emerged. Over the years, several men became persons of interest, including Christopher Wilder, an Australian who later became a notorious serial perpetrator in the U.S., but no solid evidence linked him to the Wanda case. Another suspect, Alan Bassett, a convicted perpetrator who later claimed knowledge of the case, but the police could not corroborate his claims. Other suspects included local men with violent histories, but none were charged. Despite new forensic techniques and DNA analysis decades later, the case remained unsolved. DNA testing failed to identify a perpetrator due to the age of the evidence. For decades, the Wanda Beach case have cast a long shadow over Australia. Parents became more protective. Beaches that once symbolized freedom now carried a whisper of danger. And for the families of Mary and Schmidt and Christine Sherrock, the grief never faded. Two best friends set out for a carefree day in the sun. Instead, they became victims of one of the most chilling crimes in Australian history. Some investigators believe that the perpetrator was a local who knew the dunes well. Others suspected a stranger who saw an opportunity. Despite countless theories and extensive media coverage, the case remained unsolved. But a breakthrough did come in August 2025. A new investigation into the backpacker perpetrator, Ivan Millat, was launched. The police sketch of the suspect looks incredibly similar to him. A parliamentary inquiry would investigate whether Millat was responsible for dozens of unsolved cases throughout Australia, mainly of young women. Millat was convicted in 1996 of ending the lives of 7 backpackers whose bodies were found in the Belanglo State Forest in the New South Wales Southern Highlands. He was sentenced to life in prison and passed away in jail in 2019. The investigators are hopeful that they can solve Mary and Christine's case. They would have been 75 years old in 2025. A man was fatally shot, but before he passed away, he was able to describe the event to the authorities. It still took 14 years to solve his case. Truman Lee Smith, a 40-year-old delivery driver from Irondale, Missouri, was fatally shot on February 17, 2011, in East St. Louis on the 2600 block of McCausland Avenue during what appears to have been an attempted robbery. While he was on the job making a delivery, he was approached by an armed individual demanding money. He managed to describe the event before succumbing to his injuries. The Illinois State Police Division of Criminal Investigation Zone 6 took over and maintained the investigation as a cold case for approximately 14 years. Throughout these years, Truman's mother, Jeanette Smith, called ISP every month to ensure the case remained active and was not forgotten. In the spring of 2025, a breakthrough emerged. In a groundbreaking partnership, criminal justice students from Southern Illinois University Edwardsville worked alongside ISP agents to review cold case files, including Truman's. Their work, using investigative genetic genealogy and a solvability matrix, was instrumental in advancing the investigation. On July 22, 2025, at a press conference held at the Metro East Forensic Science Laboratory in Belleville, the officials announced that first-degree slaying charges had been filed against 34-year-old Alan Davis of East St. Louis. ISP Director Brendan Kelly, SIUE, Professor Trish Oberweiss, graduate Riley Franklin, and Jeanette spoke about the significance of the student-police collaboration. IUE's involvement not only helped move Truman's case, but also aided in identifying previously unidentified victims in other cold cases. Jeanette expressed that while charges are a crucial step toward justice, they do not erase the pain. She said, "This does not give us closure. When the case is over and there is justice made, then the case will be closed, but it will not be closure for us." A mystery that haunted the Virginia detectives for more than half a century has finally been solved with the help of forensic genealogy. On June 13, 1972, the body of a young boy estimated to be around 4 years old was found beaten till his end in Massey Creek, under a bridge near Lorton. An autopsy revealed that the cause of demise was blunt force trauma, and it was ruled that his life was ended. No identification was made at the time. With no immediate leads, a local church group gave the unidentified child the name Charles Lee Charlie and arranged for his burial at Coleman Cemetery in Alexandria, Virginia. The case then unfortunately went cold. In 2004, more than 3 decades later, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children released a facial reconstruction image of the boy. This generated the most tips ever received for a case in Virginia. But still no leads emerged. In 2021, Advances in forensic-grade genome sequencing allowed the investigators to extract usable DNA from just a few millimeters of hair found on the boys' remains. The Fairfax police explained that the DNA led the detectives to a family in Philadelphia who told authorities that their deceased relative Vera Bryant had a 4-year-old son who went missing after she and her boyfriend left with their 2 young children for Virginia in 1972. The boy's name was Carl Matthew Bryant. Vera had passed away in 1980, but her remains were exhumed in 2023, and DNA testing confirmed in August 2025 that she was indeed the mother. The investigators believe that Vera, along with her boyfriend James Hedgepeth, a convicted perpetrator with a violent history, were responsible for Carl's demise. Vera and her boyfriend were traveling from Philadelphia to his relatives in Middlesex County with the 2 boys. However, when the couple arrived, they did not have her sons with them. Then, over Thanksgiving in 1972, when the couple visited Vera's family in Philadelphia, Vera allegedly told them the children were in Virginia with James' family. The couple never reported the boys missing. Both individuals are now deceased. It is also suspected that Carl's 6-month-old brother, James Bryant, was slain around the same time and may have been disposed of along their travel route. His remains have yet to be found. Fairfax County Police marked the identification of Carl as a pivotal closure to a 53-year-old mystery. Detective Melissa Wallace said, "He can have his name. We can get him his name back on his gravestone and the family can have some semblance of closure or resolution." The investigators are actively seeking help to locate James Bryant's remains or gather further information. Anyone with details, especially regarding 1970s unidentified infant remains in Virginia or Philadelphia, is urged to contact the Fairfax County Major Crimes Bureau. May 1999, a Jacksonville, Florida neighborhood became the scene of a brutal attack. For years, the case remained unsolved, with DNA evidence failing to match any profiles in national databases, until a cold case detective used advanced genetic genealogy to identify 2 suspects. Saad Kawaf, born around 1960, was a respected convenience store owner in Jacksonville, Florida. By 1999, he was approximately 39 years old, operating a business that had earned him a solid reputation within his community. On the other side of the story stands William Billy Robert Bear Jr., who was married to Melissa Schaefer. Melissa herself had been a standout high school softball star in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, from roughly 1984 to 1987, later continuing her athletic career at the University of Northern Iowa. Her skills and impact on the sport were recognized years later when she was inducted into the Iowa Girls High School Softball Hall of Fame in 2014. While Melissa's achievements were in the public spotlight, Billy's own career was rooted in law enforcement and spanned decades. He joined the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office in 1975 and dedicated 27 years to the department before retiring in 2002. Over the course of his career, he advanced to the position of detective in the JSO's intelligence unit. His assignments included work on a financial crimes task force, where he occasionally encountered Saad Kawaf in the course of his duties. These professional interactions, while intermittent, were part of Billy's investigative reach within the community. Saad's retail operations involved significant amounts of cash, with deposits ranging from $30,000 to $53,000. He was known to keep these funds at his home after bank runs, a practice that did not go unnoticed. As part of his work in the intelligence unit, Billy had once researched Saad as a potential seller of pseudoephedrine, a legal substance that can be used in the illegal manufacture of methamphetamine. Through these inquiries, Billy became aware of the large sums of money Saad routinely kept on hand. Although Saad's professional life appeared steady and prosperous, the night of May 17, 1999, brought a sudden and devastating shift. That morning, just after 9 a.m., Saad was confronted in his own garage. His wife was inside their Jacksonville home when she heard alarming screams. Rushing to investigate, she found her husband locked in a violent struggle with a man who then stabbed him. Before she could fully grasp the scene, a female suspect turned on her, grabbing and engaging her in a fierce physical fight. In the struggle, Saad's wife bit the woman hard on the arm, breaking the skin and causing her to bleed. Despite her resistance, the female suspect demanded money. Saad's wife initially handed over about $500 from her purse, but the woman insisted there was more. She made it clear that she knew the victim went to the bank each week and kept large sums of cash. The man then pressed a blade to Saad's wife's throat while repeating the demand. In the face of the threat, she surrendered a total of $53,000. Her hands were then bound tightly with duct tape, and she was secured to a chair with more tape placed over her mouth to silence her. With both suspects gone, Saad's wife managed to free herself from the restraints. She found her husband barely conscious, his body weakened from multiple stab wounds. Emergency help was called, but the attack had already left irreversible damage. Saad has lost his life. The violent nature of the assault, combined with the large sum of stolen cash, made the case a high priority for the investigators from the very beginning. In the initial stages of the investigation, police efforts to track down the suspects proved unsuccessful. In March 2003, the investigators sent blood samples from the scene to a laboratory for renewed testing. By June of that year, results revealed profiles for a woman and 2 men, one believed to be Saad himself. The official warrant, however, had all names blacked out. While these developments offered some hope, no suspects could be publicly confirmed. More forensic testing was carried out in 2014, and the results showed that material recovered from under Saad's fingernails matched the blood found on a shirt collected as evidence. Still, despite these connections, investigators were unable to move the case forward. Years passed without resolution, and the investigation eventually went cold. It would not be until 2018, nearly 2 decades after the crime, that new movement would emerge in the case. The DNA profiles from the 1999 crime scene were entered into the nationwide combined DNA index system, but no matches were found. In March 2018, Detective M. Radigan of the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office reopened the cold case and began searching for new ways to identify the unknown suspects. Her efforts led to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement submitting the samples to Parbon Nanolabs for advanced genetic analysis. At the same time, the male suspect's DNA was sent to Family Tree DNA for comparison. These new tests produced a breakthrough. FDLE confirmed that the male DNA belonged to William Robert Bear Jr., while 6 days later, Melissa Jo Schaefer was identified as the female suspect. The final confirmation of Billy's involvement came through a targeted collection of his discarded items. The investigators retrieved water bottles and soda cans from Billy's garbage, and FDLE testing revealed that DNA from a soda can match the male suspect's profile, which had been recovered from beneath Saad's left fingernail. This evidence provided the link that the investigators had been seeking for nearly 2 decades. In July 2020, the authorities announced the arrests of Bear, a retired Jacksonville Sheriff's Office detective, and his then-wife, Schaefer. During the arrest announcement, Jacksonville Undersheriff Pat Ivey noted that Bear had been a detective investigating a case that potentially involved Saad. According to the arrest warrant, both Bear and Schaefer knew Saad owned a convenience store, regularly kept substantial amounts of cash in his home. The investigators determined that this knowledge played a central role in planning the fatal attack in 1999. On December 18, 2020, Schaefer entered a guilty plea to multiple charges, including second-degree slaying, kidnapping, armed robbery, armed burglary, and aggravated battery with a fatal weapon. As part of her plea agreement, she agreed to cooperate fully with prosecutors, which included testifying against Bear if necessary. This cooperation significantly strengthened the state's case against her former husband. On March 25, 2022, nearly 15 months after her plea, Judge Mark Borello sentenced Schaefer to 30 years in Florida State Prison under the terms of her agreement. Bear faced a series of severe charges, including first-degree slaying, kidnapping with a weapon, armed robbery, and aggravated battery with a weapon. To avoid capital punishment, he chose to accept a plea deal. On September 28, 2021, Bear pleaded guilty to all charges and the penalty was formally removed from consideration. That same day, Judge Borello sentenced him to life in prison, imposing multiple concurrent life terms. The sentencing brought a legal conclusion to a case that had remained unresolved for over 21 years. In August 2003, a 64-year-old man from Charleston, West Virginia, suffering from dementia, left his home and never arrived at his destination. On August 11, 2003, a body was recovered from the Holston River in Kingsport, Tennessee. The condition of the remains made identification challenging. An extended period in the water and advanced decomposition had left the body unrecognizable. The autopsy revealed no signs of foul play, and the investigators concluded that the cause of demise was likely accidental, most probably drowning. With no evidence to suggest a crime, the case shifted focus from a potential crime to a tragic disappearance with an uncertain chain of events. Despite this, the official identification of the body remained unresolved, leaving a gap in the narrative that could not yet be closed. The case eventually went cold. Almost 17 years later, in June 2020, the case saw an unexpected development when the police department received information linking an unidentified remains case to Jerry Holbert's long-standing missing person file. This connection renewed interest in the investigation after nearly 2 decades of unanswered questions. The detectives quickly moved forward with the lead, working to determine whether the remains recovered in 2003 from the Holston River could in fact be Jerry. To confirm the possibility, the investigators obtained a DNA sample from one of Jerry's relatives. The results of the DNA analysis confirmed that the remains were indeed those of Jerry David Holbert. After 17 years, the mystery of his identity was finally solved. Jerry was born in 1939. By the time he was 64 years old, Jerry was living with dementia, a condition that had begun to shape his daily life. In August 2003, Jerry was reported missing after failing to arrive in Ohio, where he was said to be traveling from his home in Charleston, West Virginia. His family members grew deeply concerned when they realized he had not reached his destination. Without delay, they filed a missing person report, prompting law enforcement to begin searching for any clues about his whereabouts. According to initial reports, Jerry was believed to have left Charleston and boarded a bus bound for Ohio, possibly toward the Cambridge area. This detail gave investigators a starting point, but uncertainty surrounded the exact path he had taken. With his memory and orientation impaired, there was a real possibility that he might have made a mistake during his travels. The idea that he could have boarded the wrong bus became one of the key working theories in the investigation. The confirmation of his identity brought a measure of closure to the case, even though many questions about his final moments remained unanswered. The official identification also allowed law enforcement to formally conclude one of the city's oldest unresolved missing person files. Following the confirmation, police officials issued a statement regarding their findings. They acknowledged that it remained unknown how or why Jerry ended up in Kingsport, Tennessee. However, they reiterated the long-standing suspicion that he might have mistakenly boarded the wrong bus due to the effects of dementia, placing him hundreds of miles away from his intended destination. The exact circumstances that led Jerry to the Holston River remain a mystery. There were no clear indications of how he came to be in the water, and no evidence was found to suggest that anyone else was involved. The available facts pointed toward a tragic accident rather than a criminal act. Based on the investigation and autopsy results, the authorities concluded that foul play was not now, nor had it ever been, suspected in Jerry's demise. One morning in December 1981, a quiet street in Grand Forks, North Dakota, became the scene of a disturbing tragedy. With no definitive proof against the main suspect, the case lingered for decades as a cold case. Dolly Arnold was born in 1916. When she was 65 years old, she lived at the Ryan House Apartments in Grand Forks, a residence that was home to a diverse mix of tenants. The environment seemed safe, and there was no sign that anything might soon disrupt her world. But on December 23, 1981, Dolly was the victim of a fatal hit-and-run incident near North 3rd Street, just a short distance from the Ryan house where she lived. Bystanders who witnessed the incident acted without hesitation. Realizing the seriousness of what had just occurred, they immediately contacted the police. Their quick response ensured that law enforcement was on the scene in a matter of minutes. Despite the urgency, nothing could be done to save Dolly. When the police arrived, they confirmed the grim reality. Dolly was lifeless, The impact had been so severe that there was no possibility of survival. The officers secured the scene and began gathering information from witnesses, determined to uncover exactly what had happened in those final moments of her life. The investigation moved forward with urgency. An autopsy was conducted, and its findings were both precise and devastating. The medical examiner concluded that Dolly had been struck or run over, with the collision causing her immediate end due to severe trauma to her head and chest. The evidence left no doubt that the incident was violent and sudden. As the investigation continued, the police worked methodically to piece together the circumstances of the hit and run. They reviewed accounts from those who had seen the event, searched for physical evidence, and analyzed the possible routes taken by the suspect. The goal was clear: to identify the person responsible for ending Dolly's life. In time, their efforts paid off. The police identified a suspect, a bus driver who they believed was connected to the fatal collision. Following the incident, the police learned that while several individuals had spoken with Dolly shortly before she was struck, no one had actually seen a vehicle make contact with her. The timeline placed these conversations at shortly after 7 a.m., just before the fatal event occurred. The bus driver, who has since passed away and was never formally charged, emerged as the main suspect during the investigation. In his interview with police, he recalled seeing an older woman crossing behind his bus along North 3rd Street. He admitted that the only way his vehicle could have struck someone would have been if the individual had somehow become entangled with the back wheels in an unexpected way. The autopsy report offered a grim but technical explanation of what might have occurred. It stated there was a possibility of Dolly walking into or being struck by a heavy dual-wheeled vehicle, leading to her falling forward and being run over by the rear wheels. The severity of her injuries was consistent with such a scenario. But this finding did not confirm beyond doubt the exact chain of events. Police records noted that if the bus driver's vehicle had indeed struck Dolly, it was unclear whether he would have even been aware of it. Large buses, especially when maneuvering in certain conditions, can mask the sensation of impact, particularly in cases involving the rear wheels. This uncertainty added a layer of complexity to an already difficult investigation. After 4 decades without resolution, the case remained classified as a cold case until the summer of 2021. That year, it was officially closed, marking the end of an inquiry that had lingered for nearly 40 years and leaving many questions about Dolly Arnold's demise unanswered. In November 1971, the town of Westfield, New Jersey, concealed a horrific secret inside an elegant 19-room Victorian mansion. For nearly 2 decades, the case baffled the investigators, with leads going cold and theories swirling. John Emil List was born on September 17, 1925, in Bay City, Michigan. The only child of German-American parents, John Frederick List and Alma Barbara Florence List. His upbringing was shaped by a strict religious environment and a disciplined household. He attended Bay City Central High School, graduating in 1943, the same year he enlisted in the United States Army. During World War II, John served as a laboratory technician, applying his skills to support the war effort. His military service concluded in 1946, when he was honorably discharged. Following his time in the Army, John pursued higher education at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. There, he earned a bachelor's degree in business administration and later a master's degree in accounting. His dedication and academic performance led to a commission as a lieutenant through the Reserve Officers Training Corps. In December 1951, John married Helen Morris Taylor. Helen was born on January 1, 1924, in Guilford County, North Carolina. She was the daughter of Edward Guy Morris and Eva Bell Howell Morris. Her first marriage was to Marvin Everett Taylor, a second lieutenant in the United States Army. Together, they had 2 children, Brenda and Kenneth. Tragedy struck when Marvin lost his life during the Korean War. Helen was left a widow with 2 young children, facing the challenges of single parenthood. In 1950, while John List was serving on active duty at Fort Eustis in Virginia, he met Helen. Their connection developed quickly, each finding comfort and companionship in the other. For John, Helen's strength and resilience were appealing. For Helen, John's stability and ambition offered a sense of security. The newlyweds relocated to Northern California, where John began to build both his family life and his professional path. Unbeknownst to John, Helen had contracted syphilis from her first marriage, a fact she did not disclose to him. Over time, this illness contributed to her physical decline and increasing emotional instability, straining their marriage in ways John had not anticipated. John's military obligations were not yet complete. During the Korean War, he was recalled to active duty and assigned to Fort Eustis in Virginia. Balancing military service with family responsibilities proved challenging, yet he fulfilled his duties with characteristic diligence. After his service, he returned to civilian life and focused on advancing his career. Over the following years, the Johns family relocated multiple times in pursuit of better professional opportunities. They lived in Detroit, Kalamazoo, and Rochester. Eventually, they settled in Jersey City, New Jersey, where his career reached a significant milestone. In Jersey City, John became vice president and comptroller at a local bank. His position afforded him a comfortable lifestyle, and the family moved into an expansive 19-room Victorian mansion in Westfield. On November 9, 1971, carried out a calculated and brutal massacre of his family in their Westfield, New Jersey mansion. His victims were his wife, Helen, his 16-year-old daughter, Patricia, his 15-year-old son, John, his 13-year-old son, Frederick, and his 85-year-old mother, Alma. Each was slain methodically and in a specific order. Helen was the first to lose her life, shot in the kitchen as she drank her morning coffee. With the children already off to school, then went upstairs to the third floor and ended his mother's life in her bed. Later that day, as Patricia and Frederick returned from school, List slain them as well, shooting each without hesitation. In a disturbing display of composure, he then made himself a sandwich, closed out his bank accounts, and attended his son John's high school soccer game. After cheering from the sidelines, he drove his son home only to shoot him in the chest, ending the boy's life. With all 5 family members deceased, List turned his focus to concealing his crime and ensuring his escape. He placed the bodies of Helen, Patricia, John, and Frederick on sleeping bags in the mansion's ballroom. His mother's body remained upstairs in her apartment, due to her weight and the difficulty of moving her. List then composed a 5-page letter addressed to his pastor, explaining his reasoning. He claimed that he feared his family would abandon their faith in a world filled with evil and poverty, and that ending their lives was the only way to ensure their place in heaven. Determined to avoid capture, List took several steps to mislead the authorities. He meticulously cleaned the crime scene and cut his face out of every photograph in the home, to prevent the police from having an up-to-date image of him. Deliveries to the house were canceled, and he called his children's schools to inform them the family would be away on vacation for several weeks. Before leaving, he turned on the lights and left religious hymns playing through the intercom system, creating the illusion of a lived-in home. That night, List slept in the same house where his family lay lifeless. The next morning, he walked out and vanished without a trace. He would not be seen again for 18 years. The List mansion stood silent, its bright lights burning day and night, until the neighbors grew suspicious. Their unease mounted over the weeks, as no one entered or left the property. On December 7, 1971, the police entered the mansion. They were greeted by the haunting sound of organ music playing through the intercom. In the ballroom, they discovered the bodies of Helen, Patricia, John, and Frederick laid out neatly while Alma's body remained upstairs. Beside them was the 5-page letter in which List described the crime as acts of mercy, insisting he had saved his family's souls. The investigators soon found his car abandoned at John F. Kennedy International Airport, but there was no sign of List himself. The trail went cold almost immediately, leaving the authorities without answers. Though the List family's case grew cold in the years after the crime, New Jersey prosecutors remained committed to finding List and bringing him to justice. In 1989, they pursued a new strategy that would ultimately lead to his capture. The investigators learned that in 1971, List had traveled by train from New Jersey to Michigan and then on to Colorado. By early 1972, He had settled in Denver under the alias Robert Peter Bob Clark, securing work as an accountant and building a seemingly ordinary new life. During this period, List's name briefly surfaced in an unrelated high-profile case, the unsolved D.B. Cooper airline hijacking. His disappearance 2 weeks before the November 1971 skyjacking, certain similarities to the hijacker's physical description, and the notion that a fugitive with nothing to lose could attempt such a crime, made him a possible suspect. However, after his eventual arrest, denied any involvement. The FBI found no direct evidence linking him to the Cooper case, and over time, they removed him from their list of suspects, though his name still occasionally appeared in media discussions of the mystery. The breakthrough came less than 2 weeks after a national television broadcast about the List case in 1989. A neighbor in Denver recognized the description and alerted the authorities, leading to his arrest on June 1st at an accounting firm in Richmond. Even after his capture, List clung to his alias for several months, resisting identification. It was only after the investigators matched his fingerprints to his military records and presented further evidence from the crime scene that he admitted his true identity on February 16, 1990, following his extradition to Union County, New Jersey. At trial, List testified that his financial problems had reached a breaking point in 1971 after he was laid off when the Jersey City bank where he worked closed. Embarrassed and unwilling to tell his family, he maintained his daily routine as if still employed, leaving home in a suit each morning, but spending the day at job interviews or at the Westfield train station reading newspapers. He quietly diverted funds from his mother's bank accounts to avoid defaulting on the mortgage while encouraging his children to take part-time jobs under the pretense of teaching them maturity, when in reality he needed their income to keep the family afloat. On April 12, 1990, was convicted of 5 counts of first-degree slaying. During sentencing, he claimed that his mental state at the time had made him unaccountable for his actions, asking for forgiveness, understanding, and prayer. The judge, however, was unmoved, declaring that List was without remorse and without honor, and that it was time for the voices of his slain family members to rise from the grave. He imposed 5 consecutive life sentences, the maximum allowed under the law at that time. List appealed his convictions, arguing that post-traumatic stress disorder from his military service had impaired his judgment, and that the letter he left at the crime scene was a confidential communication to his pastor, making it inadmissible in court. Federal Appeals Court rejected both claims. List passed away on March 21, 2008 at the age of 82 from complications of pneumonia while in custody at St. Francis Medical Center in Trenton, New Jersey, ending a life defined by one of the most notorious family-slaying cases in American history. 2 girls that went missing in 2002 while on their way to the school bus stop were found right under the noses of the detectives working their cases. On January 9, 2002, just after 8 a.m., 12-year-old Ashley Pond was running late for school. Ashley lived with her mother, Lori Pond, at the Newell Creek Village Apartments in Oregon City, Oregon. The apartment was just 10 minutes away from the bus stop, and while walking to the bus stop, she disappeared. She never got on the bus and never made it to Gardner Middle School. Despite the efforts of the local authorities and the FBI, no clues surfaced as to the whereabouts of the missing girl. Ashley was popular at school and enjoyed being on the swim and dance teams. Neither her mother, friends, nor the investigators believed that she had run away. 2 months later, on March 8, 13-year-old Miranda Gaddis, Ashley's friend and neighbor, vanished in the same manner on her way to that very same bus stop. Miranda's mother, Michelle Duffy, had left for work about 30 minutes before Miranda was to catch the bus. When Michelle discovered that Miranda had not been at school, she immediately contacted the police, but once again, the investigators came up empty. The authorities conclude that the cases are likely connected, suspecting they were abducted by someone known in the community due to the lack of physical evidence or struggle. It seemed that whoever the perpetrator was, he or she seemed to be targeting the same type of girl. Ashley and Miranda were close in age, involved in similar activities, looked remarkably similar to each other, and most importantly, both girls disappeared on their way to the bus stop. Shortly after Ashley and Miranda disappeared, Ward Weaver III became a prime suspect in the investigation, but it took the FBI 8 months to get a search warrant to search his property. On August 13th, Weaver's son, Francis, contacted 911 to report that his father had attempted to indecently assault his 19-year-old girlfriend. The girlfriend, who ran naked from the Weaver house, told the police that Weaver indecently assaulted her and then tried to smother her. Francis also told the dispatcher that his father confessed to ending the lives of Ashley and Miranda. Both of the girls were friends with Weaver's 12-year-old daughter and had visited her at Weaver's home. Weaver's daughter was in the same dance class as the two girls. Ashley was often at the Weaver house as a house guest. She also went along with the family the previous year on a vacation to California. The trip included a visit to Weaver's dad, a Capitol Row inmate who once buried a perpetrator victim in his own yard. Weaver was arrested on unrelated charges, prompting law enforcement to seek a warrant to search his property. On August 24th, FBI agents searched Weaver's home and found the remains of Miranda inside a box in the storage shed. The following day, they found the remains of Ashley buried under a slab of concrete that Weaver had recently put down for a hot tub. The 39-year-old toolmaker had a history of violence against women. An autopsy was conducted to confirm the identification of both girls' remains. Late summer 2002, a public memorial was held for the two girls. On October 2nd, Weaver was indicted and charged with 16 counts consisting of aggravated slaying, abuse of a corpse, and indecent assault. In September 2004, Weaver pled guilty to all charges, entering a plea deal to avoid the end-of-life penalty. He received 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Relatives of the two girls said that they were frustrated and devastated to learn that the bodies were right there in the neighborhood all along. These crimes are not the first pain and suffering to have come into the lives of the two families. Both girls were indecently abused, Ashley by her father, who got probation after pleading guilty to the crime, and Miranda by a former boyfriend of her mother's who was sentenced to 75 months in jail. This is also not Weaver's first brush with the law. Besides the case of his son's girlfriend, he served 3 years in prison for striking his son's babysitter with a chunk of cement. Both of his ex-wives have accused him of violence, and in 2001, Ashley accused him of molesting her, an allegation Weaver denied and did not result in any formal charges being filed. Some people have wondered why it took so long for the police to search the Weaver property, especially since he knew both girls well, had previously been accused of indecently abusing Ashley, and was questioned by the police early in the investigation. Christy Sloan, an ex-wife of Weaver, said that she told the police back then everything they need to know. She told them about the cement that was poured in his backyard 3 days after Miranda went missing. At least both girls and their family could see justice being served. Love turned fatal and guilt traveled decades before giving way to confession when the perpetrator turned himself in. 41-year-old mother of 3, Janet Jones Luxford left her home in Florida in February 2001 to meet up with Brian Jones, a truck driver at a Jacksonville hotel where she worked. They traveled to Bessemer, Alabama together. Janet never returned home, and in 2002, one of her daughters reported her missing. Despite all efforts, no trace of Janet is found, and the case grew cold. 21 years after she disappeared on March 27, 2022, the man responsible for her end took a bus from South Carolina to Alabama where he sat outside of the police station in Bessemer until he finally got the nerve to walk into the station and turn himself in. Brian Jones told them that he was working as a day laborer and that he and Janet were in a relationship. She wanted to get money to go back to her hometown, which is California, to see her parents. And from that, an argument started. He described that it got out of hand, and he ended up hitting her with a club in the throat. He said that her demise was accidental, and that it happened at a motel in the 1100 block of 9th Avenue Southwest in Bessemer. The next day, on March 28th, Jones led the police to the place where he dumped Janet's body back in 2001. There they found a green suitcase filled with skeletal remains. The Jefferson County Coroner's Office used medical records and DNA to help identify the remains. Janet's disappearance is not a case that was on the investigators' radar. It is something that he committed 21 years ago, and nobody knew that it happened besides him. In May 2022, Jones has been charged with slaying and abuse of a corpse. He was taken to the Jefferson County Jail. and was being held on a $765,000 bond. On October 7, 2024, he pleaded guilty to ending the life of Janet. As part of the plea deal, the abuse of a corpse charge has been dropped. He was sentenced to 21 years in prison, 1 year for each year Janet was missing. As for why Jones waited so long to confess to the crime, he explained to the Bessemer police that he did not want to disappoint his parents. His parents passed away in 2021. Bessemer Police Lieutenant Christian Clemens said, "He seemed enormously remorseful and appeared to be someone who had been carrying the weight of this around for a long time and was relieved to have it over." Lieutenant Clemens described this case as a once-in-a-career type of situation. Janet's daughter, Amanda Luxford Fernandez, said, "She just disappeared off the face of the earth and there were no answers." She said that her mother's disappearance haunted her and her 2 siblings. "The only silver lining," she said, "is knowing her mother did not purposely stay away for 21 years." Family of 5 was taken away from this world in a crime that shocked Australia in 2009. The perpetrator has been identified and convicted, but he still to this day says he is innocent. In the early hours of July 18, 2009, in North Epping, Sydney, 5 family members, 45-year-old Min Lin, his wife, 43-year-old young Lily Lin, their sons 12-year-old Henry and 9-year-old Terry, and Lily's sister 39-year-old Irene Lin, were found bludgeoned till their end in their home. The only immediate family survivor is 15-year-old Brenda Lin, who was on a school trip at the time of the attack. Min was a newsagent proprietor. When the news agency that was run by the Lin family was not open, Min's sister, Kathy, and her husband, Lien bin Robert Z, went to check on them at around 9 a.m. After entering the house via the unlocked front door, they discovered the horrifying scene. The bodies have been bashed so badly that they were almost beyond recognition. Kathy immediately called for an ambulance, but she struggled to explain the situation. Robert left Kathy at the house, waiting for the police to pick up Men and Kathy's parents, who lived in Maryland's. The police and the paramedics quickly arrived at the scene, but the victims were pronounced deceased. At the crime scene, the investigators noted heavy blood spatter from floor to ceiling. Because the victims' faces were so disfigured, forensic analysis had to be used to identify them. There was no evidence of a break-in, suggesting the perpetrator used a key. Nothing had been ransacked or stolen. It was clear that the perpetrator had known the layout of the house, the location of the circuit breaker, and the fact that Brenda Lin was not home, as it appeared that the attacker did not enter her room. Forensic analysts also determined that the attacks had been started with a hammer-like object. 4 of the 5 victims had additional signs of asphyxia. There were 24 bloody shoe prints that were also evident, determined to be around US size 8.5 to 10.5, indicating a lone attacker. On July 29, Kathy and Robert made a public appeal for information about the crimes. A large public family funeral was held for the Lin family on August 8. Brenda was on a Year 10 French school trip in New Caledonia with Cheltenham Girls High School at the time and learnt of her family's case via Facebook. After the crimes, Robert and Kathy became her legal guardians and they resumed operation of the newsagent business. Brenda later alleged that she was abused by Robert during this period. In May 2010, Kathy was interviewed by the New South Wales Crime Commission, where she was told that the police found shoe prints from an Asics sneaker at the Lin family home. On police surveillance footage, Robert was captured cutting up and disposing of shoeboxes. The police forensic officers found a blood stain in his garage. The blood sample was tested, and it contained DNA of 4 of the 5 victims. He was arrested on May 5, 2011, and he was charged with 5 counts of slaying. The police told the media that he emerged as their prime suspect about 6 months after the incident. On December 22, Robert's bail application was unsuccessful, and he remained behind bars. He applied for bail again in the New South Wales Supreme Court on March 29, 2012. 4 trials took place between the years 2011 and 2016. The first 2 end in hung juries before Robert was finally found guilty by a majority verdict in January 2017. In 2021, he appealed his conviction in the New South Wales Court of Appeal. His convictions and life sentences were upheld. During the trial, the court heard that he resented Min because he was perceived as the better businessman within the extended family. Robert remains incarcerated, serving 5 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. It was reported in May 2024 that Brenda Lynn is an advocate for survivors of indecent abuse. Since 2021, she had helped to establish a network of 12 meetup hubs. The Survivor Network, in Australia, to assist other victims in their recovery process. The body of a girl was found in a wooded area in Manhattan, New York in 1991. She was finally identified after 22 years, and the person responsible for the horrific crime has been identified. On July 23, 1991, the decomposing body of a little girl was found inside a navy blue cooler along the Henry Hudson Parkway in Manhattan, New York. Her little body was naked, and she had been bound with rope and Venetian blind cord. She was placed in the fetal position with her hands pressed together. She was then wrapped in a garbage bag before she was placed in the cooler that was filled with soda cans. Due to the decomposed state of the body, identifying the little girl was impossible at first, so she became known as Baby Hope. The medical examiners concluded that Baby Hope was possibly Hispanic and had dark wavy hair that was in a ponytail. Her body was also extremely malnourished, and she weighed only 28 pounds, 13 kilograms. They believed that she was between the ages of 3 and 5. Baby Hope was also a victim of indecent abuse. The medical examiners believe that she lost her life around July 18th. According to an eyewitness, a Hispanic man and woman was seen carrying a cooler in the location where Baby Hope's body was found. A few months later, in the autumn of 1991, some suggestive images of a nude child were located in New Jersey, which some believed might have been Baby Hope, as the girl in the photographs matched the victim's description. She was buried in 1993 with funds provided by the police. 200 people attended her funeral. In 2006 and 2011, Baby Hope's body was exhumed to obtain DNA samples. The case was reopened in 2013. The tip that broke the case came from an anonymous woman who told the authorities that she had overheard a conversation 2 years prior between a mother and another person regarding the disappearance of her daughter. On the 22nd anniversary of the girl's demise, the detectives canvassed the area near where she was found in the Bronx, asking for information about her identity and the circumstances leading to her end. The police passed out flyers and announced a $12,000 reward for information leading to an arrest. This information led the investigators to Margarita Castillo. DNA was collected and tested and came back a match. She was the mother of Baby Hope, who could finally be identified as Angelica Castillo. Angelica was one of 3 children. Her father, Gennaro Ramirez, was an abusive man. Gennaro had taken 2 of his 3 children and disappeared. Angelica's mother believed that he took Angelica and her sister and returned to Mexico, but instead, he left Angelica in New York with her adult female cousin, Balvina's Juarez Ramirez, who lived in Queens. Balvina's brother, Conrado Juarez, who was 30 at the time of the alleged crime, said that he went to the apartment in Queens shared by 7 of his relatives, and he saw Angelica in the hallway. After a long interrogation, Juarez eventually confessed on videotape that he indecently assaulted and smothered Angelica, then disposed of her body in the cooler. When the girl went motionless, he summoned his sister from another room. It was she who told him to get rid of the body and who provided the cooler. Juarez then folded the girl in half, tied her, and placed her in a garbage bag inside the cooler. Juarez and his sister hailed a cab to Manhattan, dropped the cooler off in a wooded area near the Parkway, then went their separate ways. The confession was the main evidence against him, and his lawyer, Mr. Croce, argued that it was coerced. By the time of 52-year-old Juarez's arrest in October 2013, his sister had passed away. As Angelica's mother believed that she was in Mexico with her father, she never reported her missing. Juarez had waited for his trial for 5 years. In 2015, he was transferred from Rikers Island to Rockland County Correctional Facility for his own safety. He passed away in 2018 at Montefiore Najak Hospital following complications related to pancreatic cancer. A mother of 5 was brutally slain in 1985. 2 decades later, justice came knocking for the trio who is responsible. In June 1985, 40-year-old mother of 5, Ada Frances Sennenfelder was found deceased in her Winona, Minnesota apartment. She was spotted through the window by a curious neighbor who told another neighbor, who called the authorities. The first neighbor said that he and his wife noted that Ada's TV had been on all night, which they thought was strange, so he peered through the front room window. The room was reportedly full of beds, and he could see the body wedged in between one of them and a wall. Word of the crime spread as the police officers and the investigators swarmed the neighborhood on the 500 block of East 4th Street. Yellow ribbon was hastily strung across the yard around the house, and a Bureau of Criminal Apprehension team was on its way. According to news accounts from the time, more than 100 people gathered along the sidewalks to gawk as the investigation stretched late into the night. All the police said at the time was that Ada's cause of demise was not from natural causes. This shocked the Winona community. The next morning, an autopsy revealed that she had sustained over 30 stab wounds, including a fatal wound to the heart, with injuries on her face, neck, arms, and torso. A kitchen knife was found in the home that they suspect was the weapon used in the crime. They also found blood smears on a door inside the house. There were no signs of forced entry, and the investigators turned their attention to virtually everyone who knew the victim, who family members said had no known enemies. Ada's second husband, John Sennenfelder, was serving a 54-month sentence in prison for first-degree criminal conduct at the time of the crime. Her first husband, Kazimir Flack, was deceased. Her 5 children, 3 with her first husband and 2 with her second, were said to be from 6 to 16 years old, and all were living in foster homes. Although Ada still owned the home on East 4th Street where she was found, she was reportedly living on and off with a man named Clyde Dwayne Bobby Fort on Wilson Street several months before the crime. Fort had been arrested and incarcerated for unrelated crimes at the time. Police followed numerous leads and sifted through mountains of evidence, even garbage from the neighborhood, looking for clues to the perpetrator's identity. But after developing strong suspects and questioning more than 100 people about the crime, the case soon grew cold as concrete evidence eluded investigators. Evidence found at the scene suggested that multiple attackers were involved, but unfortunately, the case went cold. In 2006, the cold case was reopened by the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension's Cold Case Unit. A $50,000 reward was offered and DNA evidence from the crime scene was reanalyzed. DNA extracted from cigarette butts found in Ada's home led the investigators to Nausauqui. In the summer of 1985, prior to her end, Ada had reported to the authorities that James Raymond Bolstad had indecently assaulted her daughter. Bolstad was arrested for violating his probation. He was angry. He told his girlfriend Linda Mae Parrish that she must take care of things and get Ada to recant her statement. Parrish had a friend, John Willis Nausauqui, that moved in the same party circles as her. She asked him to help her take care of Ada. The two began harassing Ada. They broke into her apartment multiple times. They stole her personal belongings. They did what they could to intimidate her into recanting her statement to police. Eventually, it worked. Told Bolstad's probation officer that she had lied about the indecent assault allegations, while Nausauqui taped the so-called confession from the next room. On June 5, 1985, Bolstad, while still in jail, calls his girlfriend. He angrily informs her that Ada's recantation was not sufficient, and he would remain jailed. Parrish, present at a party that evening, relays a message urging Bolstad's friends to go further. With Ada, she was overheard telling partygoers that she would pay someone to end Ada's life. Following that call, Nausauqui and possibly others left the party and ended the life of Ada in her bedroom. On July 3, 2008, a grand jury indicted the 3 individuals. John Willis Nausauqui for slaying, Linda Mae Parrish for first-degree slaying that was later reduced to manslaughter, and James Raymond Bolstad. One witness testified at trial that they had seen Nausauqui the night of the incident with a bloodied hand, wrapped in a white towel. That same witness testified that they lived in the same apartment as Ada at the time. That night, Nausauqui knocked on her door and asked for a flashlight because he had lost a knife. Another witness testified that Nausauqui and Parrish paid them to help clean Parrish's apartment with ammonia and bleached the day Ada's body was found. Others who testified claimed that Parrish told everyone who attended the party to deny that anyone left the party early. A number of other witnesses testified that, over the years, Nasaki had confessed to ending the life of Ada because she was a snitch. Parrish pled guilty to conspiracy to commit first-degree manslaughter and agreed to testify against the others. She was released after serving approximately 21 months, credited for time already served. In July 2009, Nasaki pleaded not guilty and was convicted on 4 charges related to the case: first-degree premeditated slaying, slaying in the first degree while witness tampering, and 2 counts of aiding and abetting first-degree slaying. He received a life sentence with a minimum of 14 years before parole eligibility. In December 2009, Bolstad pleaded guilty to obstructing an investigation. He was sentenced to about 58 months, but was released immediately, having already served sufficient time in custody for unrelated charges. On March 21, 2024, the Minnesota Supreme Court denied Nazok's appeal, upholding the verdict against him. A truck driver discovered the remains of a woman on Highway 78 in Olive Branch, Mississippi, just east of the Coldwater Bridge. She had been strangled with a ligature. The woman's shoes, undergarments, and jacket were missing. Through its investigation, the DeSoto County Sheriff's Office determined the deceased to be a female weighing approximately 110 pounds, standing 5 foot 3 inches tall and somewhere between the ages of 20 and 35 years old. They noted that she had red to blonde hair, 3 small piercings in each ear, tattoos on the inside of both ankles, and a surgical scar on her left forearm. No other identifying characteristics could be determined for the woman, and she was classified as a Jane Doe. The case went cold for 39 years. That was until 2022, when the DeSoto County Sheriff's Office and the Mississippi Office of the State Medical Examiner received funding from Carla Davis, a Mississippi native and philanthropist who is committed to helping resolve the backlog of cold cases in Mississippi, to send forensic evidence to Othram to see if there was a match for the remains. The Sheriff's Office have also reviewed multiple accounts from people claiming that the Jane Doe might have been a missing relative. Leads were investigated and ruled out by DeSoto County's crime scene technician and evidence clerk Amber Edlin. Finally, Othram was able to match the body's DNA in March 2024, nearly 40 years later. A relative, the woman's brother in California, was contacted. The woman was then finally identified as Lori Ann Mueller-Pennell. Lori Ann was born in Missouri on September 6, 1962. This means that she was only 23 years old when she lost her life. She had been seen days before her disappearance at a truck stop in West Memphis, Arkansas. Thereafter, her family filed a missing persons report, but she was never found. Lori Ann's remains were buried at Blocker Cemetery in Olive Branch, inscribed with the name Jane Doe. January 24, 1985, the date her body was found. The Sheriff's Department says work will continue to find the person or persons responsible for the crime. We believe that justice has no time restrictions, the DeSoto County Sheriff's Department said in press release. Therefore, we will relentlessly work towards locating the perpetrators so that they can be held accountable for their actions. On June 21, 2000 in Winter Park, Florida, a citizen saw cats playing with something. He went to see what it was and found a human skull at the Orange County apartment community. The Orange County Sheriff's Office responded to the scene and investigated the area. More skeletal remains, as well as clothing, were found partially buried in a nearby vacant lot. A small caliber gun was also found near his remains. After the autopsy was conducted, forensic anthropologists determined that the remains were that of a white male between the ages of 40 and 60 years. The man's remains had been buried for approximately 7 to 8 years prior to discovery. They determined that he lost his life after he had suffered a gunshot wound to the head, as there was a hole in his skull. Due to a lack of victimology, the case went cold. The Sheriff's Office submitted forensic evidence to Othram Labs in August 2022, 22 years after the unknown man's remains were first discovered. They extracted DNA from the remains, and in January 2024, Othram identified him as Paul Lawrence Larry Rozier Jr. He was born on October 29, 1951, and was approximately 40 years old at the time of his demise. Larry was raised in the Winter Park area with his siblings and was a graduate of Orlando's Colonial Park. On April 29, 2017, Leon County deputies responded to a report of a skull found in the 2000 block of Road 145 on the west side of Neosho Rapids, Kansas, on the banks of the river. The witness that found the skull said that he walked to the river to see how high the water had risen from recent rain when he noticed the skull. More remains were found inside a fitted bedsheet and comforter inside a lawn trash sack, as well as a digital watch. The sack was tied at the top, but animals had torn into the bag to access the remains. Leon County Sheriff's detectives also responded to the scene and took over the investigation. After the autopsy was conducted, it was found that the man lived with scoliosis as he had a curve in his spine. It was also discovered that the man was middle to late aged with a height of 5 foot 5 inches, and that he likely lost his life between 2013 and 2016. The cause of his demise was unclear at the time. Details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System 4 months later in August 2017. Despite extensive efforts and the submission of forensic evidence to the FBI laboratory in Quantico, Virginia for DNA analysis in 2018, the identity of the deceased remained a mystery. Over the years, Detective Sergeant Travis Mishler of the Leon County Sheriff's Office said detectives diligently worked to identify the Neosho Rapids John Doe. Leon County deputies started working with Othram in 2022, 5 years after the human remains were found. That partnership developed new leads for law enforcement to follow. And in March 2024, Leon County detectives contacted a possible relative of the unknown man. That resulted in them finally identifying the man as Randy Bruce Clayton. Randy was born on October 12, 1953. He was from the Phoenix, Arizona area and lived in Oklahoma. Randy was never reported missing. Albie Lascioni, director of operations at Othram, said the following: "I think it is important for people to not give up hope. The technology is here and available to help resolve cases such as this. And the number one barrier at this point is funding, and that is changing. If folks want to support and are not able to financially, advocacy is very important. Advocating for new and different technologies to help bring resolution in these types of cases is very helpful and important." On April 18, 1993, a biologist conducting a tortoise survey in the desolate area near Tropicana Avenue and Durango Drive in Las Vegas, Nevada, stumbled upon a chilling scene. Half buried in the dirt, concealed beneath several large rocks lay a handmade quilt. Upon closer examination, the biologist noticed human hair and the unmistakable odor of decomposition. Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, LVMPD, cold case investigator Terry Miller said, "The Clark County coroner determined the woman likely lost her life in mid to late 1991 from multiple gunshot wounds. Despite the investigative efforts of law enforcement, the woman could not be identified, and she became known as Jane Tropicana Doe. The case went cold." In February 2023, the Metro Police requested that Othram conduct a forensic genetic genealogy investigation of the remains. At last, after more than 3 decades, the LVMPD Cold Case Section identified the victim as Linda Sue Anderson, also known as Linda Sue Andrews. Linda's brother's DNA matched with the then unidentified victim. She was a 38-year-old mother of 3 at the time of her demise and stayed in Henderson, Nevada. Her family last heard from her during a phone call in 1991. Unfortunately, her children thought for all these years that their mother abandoned them due to her suffering from a mental illness, and therefore she was never reported as missing. Mikhail Kalishin, one of Linda's daughters, told the 8 News Now investigators, Linda was living with her husband in Henderson, Nevada, while her children were staying in northern Nevada with their father. "We called each other all the time on the phone," Mikkel said. But one day in 1991, Mikkel's stepfather told her and her siblings that their mother decided to leave and start a new life. "He came home, her stuff was gone," Mikkel said about that conversation. "She left a note that she was starting a new life. She does not want anyone to go find her." Mikkel never saw the note, she said. A copy of divorce records filed in 1992 reveals her stepfather believed he last saw Linda in October 1991. Mikkel said she was told her mother was living a double life and having an affair. Everyone was just shocked. She said, "They were like, I do not understand why she would leave her children. Linda would not do that. And then we were just like, well, she did. She left us." Mikkel said she hoped one day her mother would contact her. She never expected that call from Metro Police. To know that she had been slain, and we are wondering if she suffered, and we are wondering what she is thinking and who did this to her. We do want to find answers. The hope now is that Linda's identification would lead to more information about who took her life. Anyone with information about Linda Sue Anderson or the events leading to her demise is urged to contact the LVMPD at 702-828-3521. Alternatively, anonymous tips can be submitted to Crime Stoppers at 702-385-5555. On July 19, 1972, a local teenage boy passing along through the area close to Withlacoochee State Forest in Hernando County, Florida, found the remains of a woman's body. It was in the area of High Corner Road and Cortez Boulevard in Brooksville. The victim was discovered wrapped in a bedspread with a distinctive pattern, possibly described as a pineapple damask print. The bedspread had 3 square corners and 1 rounded corner. Upon investigation, authorities concluded that the woman had been strangled 3 to 4 days before her discovery. She was about 5 feet tall, between 30 and 40 years of age, weighed between 125 and 145 pounds, with short brown hair, and with just 6 upper and 6 lower teeth. At the time, investigators believed that the woman had traveled to Hernando County from either North Florida or Alabama. Details in the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Person System. Name us. Her case grew cold and became the oldest unsolved case in Hernando County. In 2015, the remains were exhumed for additional testing and to make a reconstruction. Isotope tests indicated that she had lived in the United States for at least 5 to 10 years and spent several years in Florida. Investigators then nicknamed her Edna, due to her facial features in the reconstruction. Detectives released the facial reconstruction made of clay to the public, hoping it would spur some tips. Then in 2022, the Hernando County Sheriff's Office contacted Othram to seek assistance. On October 11, 2022, Michael Vaughan from Othram contacted HCSO Detective George Lloyd-Gren with a possible name. Lloyd-Gren was able to collect a reference sample from a possible member of the woman's family and submit it to Othram. In 2024, after 52 years, the remains were identified as Peggy Joyce Shelton, born in Kentucky on March 30, 1943. Peggy may have been seen alive a few days prior with 2 other individuals aside a white 1961 or 1962 Ford Falcon. The group was witnessed in the area exiting the vehicle and venturing into the woods, returning some time later without one group member. The Hernando County Sheriff's Office confirmed that Peggy had connections to Hopkins County, Texas, before she lost her life. The case is still being investigated by Detective Lloyd-Gren in an effort to identify the person or persons responsible for the demise of Peggy. On May 24, 1985, the remains of an unidentified male were discovered in a vacant lot near Gibsonton, Florida. The Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office responded to the scene. It was determined that the man lost his life due to a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He was between the ages of 40 and 60 years at the time of his end. He was likely 5 foot 6 inches to 5 foot 10 inches tall. Investigators also found several articles of clothing and other personal items at the scene. A forensic composite was developed and released to the public in hopes that it would generate leads about the man's identity. Details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. Name us as you. Despite investigators' best efforts, the man could not be identified, and the case went cold. In 2023, the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office teamed with Othram to determine if advanced DNA testing could help to identify the man. The investigation led them to possible relatives of the unknown man, whose disappearance in the mid-1980s had left no digital footprint for the last 40 years. Detectives traveled to Knoxville, Tennessee in January 2024, where they met with a family member of the man and matched his DNA with the decedent's from 1985. The man was identified in 2024 as Mr. Charles Allen Ray. Born in 1936, he was an honorable veteran of the United States Navy. Chief Deputy Joe Maurer of the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office said, "We were able to establish a link to Mr. Ray and his family, so we were able to bring closure to his family. For nearly 40 years, his family had no idea what happened to Mr. Ray. Advancements in technology, especially in the criminal justice realm, have furthered our abilities to solve crimes." On December 20, 1987, a woman's remains were found by a passerby walking a dog near the intersection of 130th Avenue and 72nd Court, north of Royal Palm Beach in Florida. The autopsy report showed that she was in her 20s to 30s and had brown hair with gray streaks. She had been there for a long period of time, and foul play was suspected. No clothing or jewelry were with the remains. She could have suffered from severe arthritis or a back injury, and she had a fracture on the right clavicle. Shortly after her remains were found, authorities released a forensic sketch of what the victim may have looked like, but they got no leads and it became a cold case. In 2023, thanks to a grant from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, PBSO submitted forensic evidence to Othram to identify the woman. In February 2024, 36 years later, Othram identified her as Patty Lisa Laguercio Rust from Lauderdale-by-the-Sea in Broward County, Florida. She was born in 1960. Her parents were Elizabeth B. English and Anthony Laguercio, and she had two brothers, Stephen and Anthony. She married Kenneth Allen Rust on November 11, 1984, and then went missing in 1986. Connor Ward, a resident of Palm Beach, said, "I am happy they found whoever that was. I think it is pretty cool that technology has come such a long way where they can just figure out who a person is just by facial recognition or DNA structures or stuff like that." Stuart Kaplan, a former FBI agent who now works as a defense attorney in Palm Beach, said, "The first thing now is you have a name, you have a person. The first thing I would do is obviously reach out to the family." Kaplan says detectives will likely try to interview anyone who is close to, such as her husband or ex-husband, her siblings, a boyfriend or ex-boyfriend, best friend, and her former co-workers. PBSO is asking anyone with information on Patty to contact Detective John Cogburn at 561-688-4063. Two fishermen discovered a body of a man in a drainage area on a freight property in Bensalem, Pennsylvania, in October 2003. He had no identification and his description did not match any reports of missing people in the area. An autopsy was performed and it was determined that there was no trauma to the body and that the cause was drowning. The manner could not be determined, police said. He was between 30 and 40 years of age. Bensalem police compared the unknown man to numerous missing person reports over the next 19 years without success. He was buried beneath a marker bearing a placeholder name in the Doylestown Cemetery, while attempts to identify him continued. A former Bensalem Township police detective and cold case investigator, McMullen, 54, became preoccupied with finding a modern way to solve open-ended cases. In 2022, he founded Cold Case Initiative, a nonprofit that helps fund such investigations, which can be expensive. In December 2022, Bensalem police obtained hair samples from the Bucks County Coroner's Office that were collected at the autopsy. The samples were sent to a private laboratory, which obtained a DNA profile. The funding was received from Cold Case Initiative. In October 2023, the search and subsequent investigation led investigators to speak with a man that said his son went missing around the time the body was found. He provided a DNA sample and it was a match. The body was then identified as Edward Anthony Neese. "This one is our first solved," McMullen said Tuesday. "We are so excited." Edward's father, 75, a retired diesel mechanic, said that these days he is still feeling foggy, a little confused about it all. "I waited 20 years for word about my son," he said. He and his former wife would go to police stations to file missing persons reports and to check in to learn whether officers had picked up any clues. "This was before cell phone days when you could maybe find someone," he said. He added that the spot where his son was found was not far from his home. "I just found it extremely hard to believe someone could go missing less than a mile from your house and it takes 2 decades to find out," he said. I do not know what to say. I have felt relief but sadness. But then I get to have closure. He was buried properly. His mother and I have been up to the cemetery and we changed that nameplate from an unknown to his name. We are now in the process of putting up a gravestone. Edward, who was 31 when his body was discovered, had worked as a forklift operator at a trucking firm in Delanco. He was really happy, making real good money. Things were going well for him. The Bensalem police said, "We would like to recognize the diligent effort of Bensalem Township Police Department detectives and the Cold Case Initiative Partnership. Without their assistance, the family of Edward Anthony Neese would still be wondering what happened to their loved one." While the man has been identified, officials have not said if they have determined a manner of demise or if any foul play was involved. On December 12, 1994, skeletal remains of a woman were discovered off Tom Hicken Road in Sugarloaf Township, Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, during a mining reclamation project. A state worker found her and saw her skeleton was scattered between the top and bottom of a coal bank. She was left above ground with no evidence of burial. A foreign metal fragment was located in the lower jaw. Authorities responded to the scene and determined that the remains were that of a female who was approximately 5 foot 1 inches to 5 foot 4 inches tall. It was estimated that she was between the ages of 34 and 47 years at the time of her demise, and that she had lost her life between 6 months to 2 years prior to being found. Despite extensive efforts, including comparisons and leads, the identity of the woman remained a mystery due to the condition of the remains, which rendered determining a cause and manner of demise impossible. There was a model of her face that forensic artist Frank Bender made after studying her skull in 1996. The sculpture circulated widely in the media. Was one attempt to identify her over the years. She became known as Sugarloaf Jane Doe. Unfortunately, the case went cold. In 2021, authorities released a computer-generated likeness of the unknown victim and offered a reward for any information. Through recent advancements in DNA technology and forensic genealogy, a possible relative of this unidentified woman was discovered by Othram. Investigators say they interviewed the relative and an additional DNA sample was obtained, confirming the relative was her sister. In February 2024, after nearly 3 decades, state police reported that the unidentified woman was positively identified as Margaret Carol Wininger. She was born on September 5, 1948 in Hazleton, Pennsylvania. She was living with her family in Northeast Philadelphia until she went missing in the early 1990s. Margaret attended West Hazleton High School from 1965 to 1966. She was maid of honor for a wedding at Our Lady of Grace RC Church in 1968. Her parents divorced in 1965, and her father had been a greenskeeper at Valley Country Club. Her sister joined the Women's Army Corps after high school. While the identification of Margaret brings some closure, the investigation into her tragic end is ongoing. State police are urging anyone who may have come into contact with her in the Luzerne County area during that time to come forward with any information. In a statement, State Police Trooper Brian Knowles said, "Although 30 years old, this investigation was never set aside. And with the advancements in technology, troopers persisted with the investigation." Alameda, California police have solved a crime 45 years after it happened, thanks to new technology. On March 16, 1977, Richard Bichelle was awakened by his 17-year-old son at 2:30 a.m. Richard Jr. worriedly told his father that he thought he heard a noise on the front porch of their home in Alameda, California. He was right. Outside, the pair saw a burglar casing the house. Richard and his son chased the burglar down the street. Richard Sr. was well ahead of his son. When his son caught up, he found his father stabbed 10 times on a sidewalk on Lincoln Avenue and the suspect gone. 43-year-old Richard, a U.S. Marine who fought in the Korean War, was transported to a local hospital where he succumbed to his injuries. Richard Jr. had the following to say about his father. "Dad was a good man. He would bend over backwards to help people out, even strangers." There was a possible suspect identified in the case, but due to limitation in DNA technology, charges could not be filed and the case went cold. 44 years after the crime happened, in 2021, the police department's cold case unit resubmitted a key piece of DNA evidence, a jacket that the suspect was wearing the night of the attack. A sample of blood from that jacket was sent to the Serological Research Institute in Richmond, which confirmed the blood belonged to the victim. The following year, in 2022, the case was finally cracked and the perpetrator was identified as Richard Curley Bernard, who was 23 years old at the time of the crime. On March 22, 2022, retired Alameda Police Department Detective Lorenzo Graham said during a news conference he had been arrested and convicted for a series of Alameda burglaries, along with 2 known assaults. The detectives said that they also found circumstantial evidence finally proving that Bernard, who was a suspect back in 1977, was in fact the perpetrator. Bernard, who spent much of his life in prison for dozens of burglary convictions, was later shot and slain in Texas in 1989. Alameda County Deputy District Attorney Mark Melton said, "The suspect is deceased, but the family of the victim now knows the identity of the perpetrator and that law enforcement never stopped looking for him." Richard Jr. said, "I am happy that we have got a final resolution to this. It has been on my mind for the last 45+ years. It has been a long, hard road, but I am glad we have a final resolution to this. On behalf of my family, my late mother, my 2 younger brothers, I would like to just say thank you to everyone. I do not know if there is any real closure. It does not change a whole lot, but we are glad that we do have a final positive ID." A young girl would lose her life, only for the detectives to learn that the perpetrator was very close to her. In March 2015, 18-year-old Angelica A.J. Hadsell was supposed to be enjoying a relaxing spring break at home from her first year at college, but it turned into a tragedy when she went missing. A.J. was going through a breakup at the time she returned home to Norfolk, Virginia, for spring break. This led her mother, Jennifer Wright, to believe that her daughter was blowing off steam when she went missing after sending a text that said she was out with friends. However, after A.J. did not return home and her ex-boyfriend, Corey French, found a piece of her credit card in the road, the investigators began to search more urgently for the missing teenager. The investigators initially suspected Corey, who A.J.'s stepfather, Wesley Paul Hadsell, had claimed had become obsessive over his stepdaughter. Wesley adopted A.J. because A.J. was getting her hermit, and she never used her biological dad's last name. Wesley, who had a criminal history, including convictions for bank robbery, breaking and entering and burglary, was proactive in the search for his missing stepdaughter. During the search, he was arrested for breaking into the home of a person, claiming he was suspicious that person had kidnapped A.J. He said the following after his arrest for breaking and entering: "I would do anything for my daughter, my wife, my kids, and they make it sound like I would do anything to keep myself out of trouble. I could not sit a minute away from where my daughter may have been." However, the investigation began to center around him. Wesley's co-workers told the police that he was visibly agitated and had to take the rest of the day off work, on the day his stepdaughter went missing. The investigators searched Wesley's Chevy Astro van and discovered a shovel duct tape and work gloves in the back of the car. They also had a look at Wesley's GPS system on his car, and that led them to an abandoned house 60 miles away from the family's home. On April 9th, A.J.'s body was then discovered hidden in a ditch behind the abandoned house. The autopsy discovered that she had been poisoned intentionally with a heroin overdose. A.J. was a softball player at Longwood University with a bright future. Norfolk Police Detective David Benjamin said, after more than 3 years, on November 19, 2018, 40-year-old Wesley was charged with slaying after he kidnapped and poisoned A.J. This happened after an investigation into his involvement eventually led a judge to say there was overwhelming evidence against him. The police investigating the case said that he kidnapped A.J. while she was folding laundry and listening to music in the living room. The prosecutors said that he then tried to distract the police by lying and planting evidence in various places, including one of her jackets at a friend's home. Wesley admitted to breaking into the home, but denied hiding the jacket there. In 2020, his first trial was declared a mistrial after 2 days, over disagreements on what evidence the jury should be allowed to hear. On January 28, 2022, in court, the first person to take the stand was Jennifer, A.J.'s mom. She said that she and Wesley met in 2010 and ended up getting married a month after they met. They have one child together who is 10 years old. Jennifer said that in 2015, she kicked Wesley out of the house because she found out he started using illegal substances. He then decided to stay at a hotel close to their home. Jennifer said that she even tried holding an intervention with Wesley, his mother, and his nephew. On March 2, 2015, she picked AJ up from college. AJ was a freshman, double majoring in information technology and computer programming. Jennifer said that on the day AJ disappeared, Wesley called her at work to drop his personal truck off and pick up his work truck. She said that she told him to leave the keys in the mailbox just in case AJ needed to go somewhere. When Jennifer arrived home, she testified that AJ was gone. However, her wallet and coat were still in the home. The family also noticed some clothes of AJ's were missing, and a note was left on the kitchen table. The note read, "With everything going on, it is a lot to deal with." Jennifer said that she questioned the note because it did not make sense to her or her other daughters. During the search for AJ, Wesley often received tips and would go investigate them. Jennifer said that every time she found something out, she would let an investigator know what they found. Jennifer said that Wesley tried to blame Corey, AJ's ex-boyfriend, for her disappearance. Jennifer confirmed that Wesley and AJ were close, and confirmed that she does not believe he ever assaulted, touched, or made inappropriate comments toward her. She said that she did feel uncomfortable when she found out that he was doing illegal substances. The man who said that he sold illegal substances to Wesley also testified and said that he had been selling Wesley cocaine and heroin for years. A tense moment arose when Zach Hoffer, AJ's stepfather before Wesley, was prepared to make a testimony before the judge's sentencing. Wesley's attorney, James Alinson, objected, in which the judge sustained the motion, after which Zach had to be forcibly removed by authorities from the courtroom after yelling expletives toward Wesley. On April 4, 2022, Wesley Hadsell was sentenced to life in prison plus 15 years for ending AJ's life. The extra years is 5 years for concealing the body and 10 years for being caught with illegal substances while incriminated. Wesley continues to maintain his innocence. He again denied his involvement during a jailhouse interview by saying, "A house fire would end the life of a husband and father of 5. DNA technology would lead to the discovery of what truly happened on that day." On May 22, 2018, a fire was reported to Cannon City Fire at the home on the 1800 block of Pinion Avenue in Fremont County, Colorado. The firefighters then discovered the body of 76-year-old Kenneth Orchard in the charred interior of his own home, at the bottom of a stairwell near the front door. His wife, Laureen Orchard, was leaving her warm water therapy class when she got a call from a neighbor telling her that the fire department was at her house. According to an autopsy, Kenneth's cause of demise was strangulation and blunt force injuries. He had hemorrhages throughout his body and his eyes. On the inside of his lips, on the inside of his cheeks, his skull and his neck was fractured. Many witnesses came forward and told the investigators that they saw an unidentified male walking away from the Orchard residence on the morning of the fire. One witness told the investigators that she saw a male walking across Spring Creek Park around 200 yards from the fire. She told the investigators that he was in such a hurry and got into a white pickup truck and drove off. It was soon discovered that the white pickup truck was owned by Fremont Paving and Ready Mix. In April 2019, a former Fremont County Sheriff's deputy, Christopher Pape, was sentenced to 2 years in prison after pleading guilty to stealing silver ingots, nearly $6,000 in coins and other valuables from Kenneth's home while helping to investigate the case. The investigation was declared a fatal arson and a slaying, but it would take 2 years before a person would be charged in this case. DNA was found on an empty gas can on the house's front porch. In 2020, when tested, it matched to Matthew Rogers. The investigators also found items stolen from the Orchard home at Rogers' parents' home, as well as burnt items of clothing. He also worked at Fremont Paving and Ready Mix in 2018. Rogers was dealt a slew of charges, including first-degree arson, first-degree burglary, and slaying in the first degree. Court documents painted a clearer picture as to what happened to Kenneth the morning of May 22. According to the Fremont County Sheriff Alan Cooper, this was a burglary gone horribly wrong. Rogers intended to burglarize the home of Kenneth. Kenneth had returned to his home after having worked his shift at Big Burger World and then stopped by the Family History Center at his church. The investigators believe that Kenneth was returning to his home in the middle of the burglary and Rogers attacked. 2 fires were then set inside the house, one in the master bedroom on the 2nd floor and another right in front of the front door of the residence. Rogers was being held at the Fremont County Detention Center without bond. The investigators did not have to look far in order to make an arrest. He was already being held at the detention center for separate, unrelated domestic violence charges. On April 5, 2022, 47-year-old Matthew Rogers was found guilty of all charges. At the sentencing on May 23, before both the prosecution and defense made their final statements, members of Kenneth's family made impassioned and heartbreaking statements to senior Judge Plotz. All 5 of his children recounted the horrors they have each had to live through after the atrocious slaying of their father. Lanai, Kenneth's eldest daughter, said, "I am done giving time to the man who ended the life of my dad. He took time and memories that did not belong to him. I am not giving him any more with the exception of this hour." Kenneth's son and second child, Lynn, also had thoughts to share with the judge and those gathered. He recounted how alongside his newly widowed mother, he entered Walmart the day after the crime, in an attempt to gather her new belongings as her home was destroyed. He said, "Everything in the world my mother had was ripped from her. We stood in the clothing section of Walmart with an empty shopping cart, in shock, literally paralyzed by the magnitude of the task. How do you start there? What do you put into a shopping cart to rebuild a life?" Amy, the third child, said, "My whole world turned black. My face was black. My pants were black. My clothes were black. All my childhood memories were black. The windows were so black. And most of all, my heart was black." On May 22, 2018, Matthew Rogers gave me and my family a life sentence. A life sentence of trying to bring back color when we were given so much black. Lorene, Kenneth's wife of over 40 years, made her statement last. She said, "He was my best friend, husband, and companion. Where was my comfort and confidence? I needed Ken to help me cope with losing Ken." Rogers was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. The perpetrator would hear his fate 33 years after the crime took place. In May 1990, 20-year-old Susan Negersmith, from Carmel, New York, in Putnam County, was at the Jersey Shore in New Jersey with friends for Memorial Day weekend. She then went missing. The authorities found her body on May 27 behind a restaurant. Her demise had first been classified as accidental, but was later ruled a slaying. It was after a medical examiner who later studied autopsy photos listed 26 points of trauma on the victim's body. She had also been assaulted. Neither evidence from the scene, which included scrapings from under her fingernails, nor police investigations, led to anyone being charged in her assault or demise, and the case went cold. 28 years later, in 2018, lab testing identified a person of interest, but then the authorities had to do the difficult job of finding a way to obtain his DNA. In June 2021, 3 years later, the DNA matched to Jerry Rosado. The Cape May County Prosecutor's Office then charged him in April 2022, when he was 62 years old, with assaulting Susan. He was not charged with her demise. In 2023, a state appeals court decision led to the dismissal of the charge due to the statute of limitations, and the state's highest court decided not to disturb that decision. At the trial level, Rosado's lawyers argued the statute of limitations at the time of the crime. In 1990 was 5 years and the clock had run out. The trial judge, though, denied the argument, saying the clock did not start until 2021, when the investigators made a DNA match, citing a 2002 change to the assault statute. Rosado's lawyers went to the appellate level, where a panel of judges reversed the trial judge, finding the statute of limitations was 5 years in 1990. The appeals decision explained how 2 changes to the assault law since then did not impact this case. First, in 1996, the statute of limitations for assault was removed, starting for cases that had not yet run out, as of May 1, 1996. In Susan's case, the statute of limitation for assault ended May 27, 1995. And in 2002, An amendment to the assault law provided for a time exception for cases involving DNA or fingerprint evidence. But the amendment provided for no retroactivity, nor does other case state and federal case law. The state Supreme Court quoted the 2023 appeals decision, which found the 2002 amendment could not reach back and constitutionally revive a statute of limitation that had already expired. The decision effectively ends the case against Jerry Rosado. Emily Negersmith, Susan's sister, said, "She was just a young girl, 20 years, down with her friends. She did not deserve this. No one deserves that." Dawn Negersmith, Susan's other sister, said, "You know, we just want it solved so we can have closure on this case." The Salt Lake City, Utah Police Department could finally announce the closure of a cold case from 48 years ago. On February 28, 1974, 39-year-old James Bednarik was shot and lost his life at his own home in Salt Lake City, Utah. As part of the investigation, the investigators developed a profile about James. Through their research, the investigators discovered that he was selling stolen gasoline. The police discovered that a year prior to his end, James had gotten into a dispute with an owner of a gas station over stolen gas. James then shot and injured the owner as a result of the argument. In the investigation of who ended James' life, all available leads were explored by the detectives. However, the police were unable to identify the suspect and the case went cold. 44 years later, in 2018, the squad from the Salt Lake City Police Department used new forensic technology to test the evidence. However, no new leads were generated as a result of the test. In 2022, 4 years later, 2 retired police detectives, while having lunch, discussed the case. Eventually, the 2 detectives learned that George B. Toone had confessed to ending the lives of 2 men in Salt Lake County, including James Bednarik, at the request of the gas station owner. The detectives then requested the Salt Lake City Police Department Crime Lab to perform a forensic test on 2 latent fingerprints collected at the crime scene in 1974. Then those fingerprints came back to Toone. SLCPD Chief Mike Brown said in a press release, "And care both active and retired officers have in these cases. I am proud of our detectives. They never let up in their pursuit of justice." Based on the evidence they have in the case, Salt Lake City Police said that the detectives are confident that Toone was responsible for the end of James. Toone was hiding as he waited for James to return home in the 500 block of East 1st Avenue and then executed him. Toone lost his life on September 11, 2011, at 75 years old due to natural causes. In 2015, another case was linked to Toone. On October 28, 1976, 47-year-old rancher William Erkenbrack was shot in the back of the head with a high-powered rifle as he was opening the gate to his ranch in Clarks Canyon, Utah. If he were still alive, they would have had enough evidence to charge Toone. Blaine Erkenbrack and Bill Erkenbrack, Williams' family, said in a statement at the time, the modus operandi in each slaying was startlingly similar. James' family has been notified of the status in the case. The police are still continuing to investigate the reports that Toone ended a second person's life in Salt Lake County. A drive-by shooting would lead to a confession and the arrest of 3 people. On November 9, 2018, 23-year-old Tavant White and 21-year-old Alicia Justice were found deceased in a crashed black Honda Accord that hit a cement wall of the Natchez Stew Pot in Mississippi. When the Natchez police arrived on the scene, they discovered that the vehicle had been shot at several times. The police obtained surveillance footage from multiple cameras located near the scene and identified the vehicle from which the bullets were fired as a silver and gray 2008 Chevrolet Cobalt. Tavant was under grand jury indictment for armed robbery and possession of a weapon by a convicted felon. He had been shot before and no arrests were made in those shootings because Tavant did not cooperate with the investigators. The case would only be solved more than 2 years later when the police arrested 18-year-old Jameco Davis and 23-year-old Kendarius Davis and Jack Lawrence Jackson. The 4th person, Michaelaus Johnson, is deceased. In February 2021, Kendarius Davis was in the Adams County Jail undergoing questioning about a separate incident. During an interview with the investigators, he confessed to having information about the slaying of Tavant and Alicia. Warrants were issued for Jackson and Jamaica Davis. Jackson denied any involvement in the crime and claimed to be with his girlfriend on the night of the crime. Jameco Davis also denied any involvement in the crime and claimed to have been in Texas during the time of the crime. However, when the investigator showed Jameco Davis an Instagram video made on the day of the shooting, showing him and Kendarius Davis together and bragging about the crime, he admitted it was him in the video, but denied any involvement in the shooting. On October 10, 2021, Kendarius Davis recanted his original statement implicating Jameco Davis and Jackson. Instead, he offered up the names of 3 others as being responsible. On March 7, 2022, Kendarius Davis recanted his recantation, claiming he did so because he feared for his life. They knew Tavant White and started shooting when they saw him driving past them. On June 24, Jackson and Jameco Davis were sentenced to 2 life sentences to run concurrent with each other, plus another 10 years for firearm enhancements. Kendarius Davis entered a plea to second-degree slaying. He has not been sentenced yet. On January 19, 2024, the firearm enhancement convictions were vacated for Jackson and Jameco Davis. However, it affirmed the life sentence given to each of them. They appealed their sentence, claiming that the firearms enhancement was illegal, that the trial court did not follow proper procedure, and that the verdict was against the overwhelming weight of the evidence. Further, Jackson claimed in his appeal that Judge Blackwell erred in not separating his trial from Davis's. The court agreed with the firearm enhancement portions of the sentences and vacated those, but found that all other issues were without merit.